Get it going? Well, happy birthday, Amy, and welcome. In honor of your birthday, I'm going to make this a short one today. So, in honor of Amy's birthday, you all get a present. Obviously, today you can see that we're going to talk about the dangers of working around forklifts. And I know that that's not something that you all, have forklift traffic here in the office, but obviously from time to time you go out in the shop or you go to job sites, and certainly there's a lot of forklift traffic in those areas. So we're just going to kind of talk about that as your annual reminder to be careful around those that are working on forklifts. There's the statistics show that forklifts continue to be a very hazardous operation, not only for the forklift operator, but most facilities, unless it's some big warehouse or something, most facilities, there's a lot more people that are working around forklifts than are actually operating forklifts. So it's, those of us that are walking around the people driving the forklifts can have more of an influence on protecting these statistics, because of there's a greater likelihood of one of us coming in contact than one of them coming in contact with us. There are 100 fatalities each year related to pedestrians and forklift. That's a lot of people dying just because, two people not paying attention. And that's really, most of the time, that's what it comes down to is if two different people could have paid a little bit better attention, those 100 people could still be with us. And there are over 20,000 serious injuries each year. And it never fails, the train always goes by for the training class. But 20,000 people are getting hurt. And for some of you maybe heard me say this before, but the thing about forklift accidents, they don't ever tend to be minor. Due to some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, when you hear of a forklift incident, it's never, an abrasion. It's never a bruise. It's usually much, much more severe than that. And so, and I always joke around and say that it's like wrestling an elephant. And the elephant doesn't have to be really mad at you to hurt you really bad. And that's the same thing with forklifts. It doesn't have to be on appearance, some big catastrophic thing to have very catastrophic results. So, very dangerous to work around. This will kind of give you a breakdown of some of the ways that people do get hurt. And for those of you that are squeamish, that's a fake picture. Okay, it's nothing more than Hollywood right there. Okay? But some of the people, and this is how they get hurt, crushed between a stationary surface and a fork truck represents 25% of the fatalities and the accidents related to forklifts and pedestrians. Crushed between two forklifts represents 11%. Struck or run over by a forklift represents 10%. And struck by falling material represents 8%. And honestly, struck by falling material is probably the most senseless one of them all, because we should never be walking around raised loads. And so that's those are really, really easily avoidable. Some of the facts about a forklift that make them dangerous to work around is the sheer weight of a forklift. And a lot of people don't realize it just looks like a little small vehicle, and they don't realize that, how much power and weight is involved. And the whole back end of a forklift is nothing but weight. It's nothing but a big counterweight. Why does it have a big counterweight? Because a forklift is essentially a balance or a lever, and it's got to have a bunch of weight on the back because you're going to put a bunch of weight on the front. And when you combine those two things, a forklift can weigh as much as several cars. So it's a lot of weight involved, and that's one of the reasons why I say a minor accident can lead to really catastrophic results, because even though it might be smaller than a car, it's much, much, much heavier than a car. And they also say that a slow-moving forklift, even just like 5 miles an hour, a slow-moving forklift is like getting hit by a car going 30 miles an hour. So that's that's something to think about. Just imagine standing in the middle of the road, a car going 30 miles an hour smacks into you. That's like getting bumped into by a forklift out in the shop. Okay. Another thing that makes them dangerous, and how many of you have operated a fork truck before? So roughly half. So the half of you that have operated a forklift, you know one thing specific about the forklift. Probably the first time you ever drove one, what surprised you the most?
Steering.
When you turned, that rear end swung out, right? And it kind of takes you by surprise. And it turns a lot sharper than you expect. And as a pedestrian working around those fork trucks, we need to understand that when a fork truck turns, it kind of turns like a school bus. The back end's going to kind of really whip out, okay? And so when that swing comes out, we need to make sure that it doesn't track like a car, and it's because of that rear wheel steering. And so when we're walking around one, we need to remember that and understand that, so that we're giving it a lot of leeway, not just a little bit. That rear end swing is probably responsible for a lot of those statistics we talked about at the beginning. The other thing is that, and this kind of makes them less safe than cars, in that when we go out in the real world and we're driving a car, we have laws. We have speed limits, we have stop signs, we have traffic lanes, we have, there's a lot of rules, and my daughter's just now, she's going through driver's ed, and so we're talking a lot about those rules. And unfortunately, I've forgotten a lot of those rules, and so she's reminded me of them. But there's rules out there. There's lanes. There's even rules about the lanes. All bets are off when it comes to forklifts, because there's really no alley, no lane, no specific place that a fork truck can drive. There generally aren't stop signs and yield signs and things like that. So instead of having like a road where we can reasonably anticipate going out here that we're going to have to look both ways when we cross that road. But we walk across the shop floor and they could be coming from any direction. So we need to understand that so that we're on high alert when we're working around forklifts. No speed limit signs. I mean, one of the things that when we train people on forklifts, one of the first things we tell them is that the operator is responsible for the safe operation of a forklift. And that includes adjusting the speed for the conditions. If there's pedestrians around, if the floors are slick, if they're carrying heavy loads, that sort of thing, is that we want them to adjust that speed. But that means that our safety is dependent on them having reasonable judgment. And not everybody has reasonable judgment. So we have to make sure that we're going to stay out of the way and allow that person, we're going to be on high alert, basically. I'll sum it up as that. I want you to imagine for a second jumping out in your car and heading to lunch later on and have 4 people sitting on the hood of your car leaning up against your windshield. That's about what driving a forklift is like. Okay, that's about the same type of visibility that a forklift operator has. And it may seem like they're in this little scooter that they can see all around, but they're not. There is a lot of blind spots. Tons more blind spots than any of you have in your cars. And so, as pedestrians, we need to understand that, because we may think that they see us no problem, but the reality is that there's huge blind spots, and they may not even know we're there. And that's why we have to give them the wide berth. Some of the things that cause the reduced visibility are the mast itself. I mean, that's the whole premise of a forklift. You got this big mast in front of you. All of that's blocking vision. The cage, protective or large loads, and the twisting and turning that forklift operators do. And there's even blind spots in the mirrors. The other thing is that you may be able to, if a forklift operator shouts out to you, you may be able to hear them very clearly. But understand that they're sitting on top of a motor. And so when you're trying to communicate with them, they don't hear you as well. So you may say, hey, hang on, I'm right over here, but they can't hear you because they're driving this, little LP powered motor. And so understand that their hearing is also impaired. So not only are they visually impaired with blind spots, but they're also have problems hearing because of the noise in the facility and also the noise on the piece of equipment that they're driving. Just to throw this out there so that nobody thinks that they can, it can't be that difficult, I'll just go jump on a forklift. If you have not been trained and authorized to operate a forklift at George Cook Sons, then you're not authorized, okay? So if you guys have a fork truck license, you've gone through the training program and you've done all that, then, and you need to get on a forklift, go for it. But if you don't have a fork truck license and you haven't been trained and gone through the training or gone through the program, then you are not authorized to operate a fork truck. So just so that we're clear.
How often do you have to be recertified?
Every 3 years. Yeah, so if you went through it like 19 years ago, it doesn't count. Every 3 years you need to go through a hands-on evaluation. So the licenses are only good for 3 years, and that's 3 years at a maximum. If something shows that training needs to be redone because maybe people are, reckless driving or significant changes in the job, or an accident, something like that, then retraining needs to be soon, but 3 years. Some of the things that as pedestrians we need to really pay attention to, horns, they mean something, okay? And I know that we get littered with sounds in a manufacturing environment. There's all kinds of warning alarms and beeps and you almost get immune to it, and that's unfortunate that there's so much warning going on out there that we get immune to it. But the consequences are so severe that when it comes to working around forklifts, we really need to tune our ears into listening for those horns. They're trying to tell us something. We train people on forklifts to give a little honk when they're coming around blind intersections and high pedestrian traffic areas. So if as pedestrians we get immune to that and we're not listening for it, then that little honk is for nothing. Need to listen for backup alarms. The fork trucks should all have backup alarms. Pay attention to that. Sounds of the engine, and then most of them, I think all of them have flashing lights. So that's another thing to be on alert for. And those are all things that help us identify when a forklift's around so that we can be on that alert that we need to be. Raised loads could fall. This is an office environment, and a lot of you won't be involved in this, but a lot of times the accident starts with the people that load the pallets. So it may not be the forklift operator that necessarily caused an accident, but it's somebody who's placing things on a pallet that, sloppy loads, and then the forklift operator goes to lift them and they're unbalanced, or the pallet wasn't in good condition. Things like that cause it to fall. Now, as pedestrians, we're going to stand clear when somebody raises a load because things can fall, and we understand that. But if we're stacking loads, we need to make sure that we're securing them very well. And never walk under a raised load. We actually, at one of your sister companies recently, just had an incident where it could have been really bad. It ended up not being so bad, but somebody was raising a load up, got it to the top of a rack, and a hydraulic hose busted. The load kind of came down on the rack and was sitting there and was supported by the rack for a while, and everybody did the right things. They got off, they caution taped the area, and called in maintenance to try to figure out. There were some people that probably were getting in harm's way a little sooner than they should have to try to figure out the problem. But the whole time this load is sitting up there supported on that rack, and everything seemed like it was okay until the hydraulic fluid started leaking to the point where it got to where it was under all four wheels, which most of you probably know that makes a slick environment. The fork truck was kind of in a bind, so it was wanting to push it away from the rack, and eventually when the wheels got slick with the hydraulic oil, it pushed it away from the rack and the load came crashing down. Had those maintenance guys been under there at the time, they would have been one of those statistics. So don't ever get under a raised load. Something else to understand is that fork trucks, they can stop pretty quick. They have brakes. They don't take a big lag time to stop. But understand that the things that are on the forks may not stop. So I don't intend to give you all a physics lesson, but momentum is going to cause those things to continue to want to move forward. And so they may stop the fork truck and it may not hit you, but that 55-gallon drum of acetone might roll out and hit you. So we don't want to jump out in front of fork trucks. Try to avoid being distracted when you're walking around fork trucks. Make sure that you're visually looking both ways, looking all directions, and just kind of a rule of thumb, people, if you're walking in an aisle and there's fork truck traffic in that aisle, then walk single file, give the fork truck traffic fork truck operator as much room as possible. And another little hazard that happens when there's a lot of fork truck traffic is a lot of times they drop hydraulic fluid, they drop oils, and so sometimes you'll have some slick floors around where fork truck traffic is. If you need to approach a fork truck operator while they're on the fork truck, then stay away until the driver sees you. Okay, flag them down, get their attention, but stay well away. Wait for the driver to stop completely, and make sure you don't put your feet under the fork truck. And I see a lot of people walk up and talk to an operator, and they're standing, and because of the noise, they might be standing kind of close. If that operator's foot slipped or got into gear somehow, all that weight of those 5 cars is going to crush their feet. And then make sure that you walk away and you're well away before the operator takes off. Who has the right of way? Pedestrian or the fork truck operator? One brave soul said pedestrian, and then that's right. Pedestrians do have the right of way. Who intends to exercise that right of way? Not me. It's not a wise person that exercises that right of way. Okay, so it's okay that as you're walking around and you see a fork truck, take a step back and wave them on. Make sure you give them the right of way. Okay, but one of the main reasons that they say pedestrians have the right of way is to make the fork truck operator be on high alert for pedestrians. Okay, but as a pedestrian, I know I don't want to tangle with one of the fork trucks, so I'm going to give them the right of way. Probably goes without saying, but horseplay, bad news. Bad news for lots of reasons, but certainly working around forklift is bad news. I can't begin to tell you how many stories I could tell you about different. It's always back shifts that do things like fork truck drag racing and fork truck rodeos and stuff like that. And it's no cook companies, Mr. Cook. None of my stories come from your companies, but definitely lots of times where either property damage or injuries have happened because people have done horseplay working around or on fork trucks. Watch out for high traffic areas, loading areas. You've got your loadout areas where there's going to be a little more traffic. And sometimes it's not even just fork truck traffic in those areas, but a lot of hoisting and the cranes are being used a lot. So be careful around those areas anytime trailers are being loaded. And sometimes those can be extra slick because of the fork truck coming in and out of wet conditions. If we are preparing a load, we want to make sure the pallet's in good condition, the load is balanced, load secure, and that we're not exceeding the capacity of the fork trucks. That's a big deal. A fork truck that's overloaded is an unstable, unsafe fork truck. You know, we have scissor lifts, we have other, you know, other things that we can get our hands on to get elevated if we need it. Never ask someone to raise you on the forks of a fork truck. If you do get in a basket, which I don't even think, does anybody know, do we have a basket here anymore? Probably not with scissor lifts around. But if there are baskets that are approved that you can chain them to the mast and they have, you know, 4 sides of protection, and you have to put on fall protection if you're being raised up in that. But that's the only way that it's approved to be raised by a fork truck. Just a quick summary, remember that fork trucks operate differently than cars, okay? So when we're out there, we need to really respect that and don't forget about it. And I use this word a lot when we're doing this training, but complacency. Don't get complacent of the hazards around you. Fork trucks being an important one not to get complacent with. Remember that the drivers have reduced visibility and reduced ability to hear. And listen for those fork truck warnings, the honk, the horns, the backup alarms, and the you know, verbal warnings. Stay away from forklifts until the driver sees you and stops. Don't get your feet underneath them, and wait until you're given the right of way. If a fork truck operator wants to give you the right of way, wait until they see you and physically make some motion to tell you to go. Okay? Are there any questions about working around forklifts?
Where do you get the license? Where do you get the certification?
Well, you can do them in-house, which is how it's done here.
Who's authorized to certify?
Michael Bear does it in manufacturing.
Okay.
Fork truck companies do it also.
Sometimes fork truck companies will do it. Yeah. I do a lot of them. Oddly, that gives it a lot of them. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all very much. Have a great Easter, and please, if you haven't already, answer the questions on the training guide and put them over there by Jennifer, and have a